Okay, on to a mitochondrion. So mitochondrion is singular, mitochondria is plural. So again, trying to visualize what goes on here. I think the hardest part of cell respiration is trying to remember what it does. Cell respiration, the words itself, doesn't scream energy production, not to me, anyways. But there, you can kind of go around and think about it a little bit, and use the words. So, cell respiration, if we think about the word respiration, and we'll talk a little bit more about aerobic versus anaerobic respiration on Monday. I'm going to give you a little something to look at for fermentation, which is kind of the alternative to cell respiration, but just the word respiration. Respiration means breathing. What do we breathe? We breathe oxygen. So we have to have oxygen and we have to have food to make energy. So the reason why oxygen keeps you alive is because you have to have it along with glucose to make energy. Okay. So you might encounter the different parts of mitochondrion. So here's what I think it looks like. I think that a mitochondrion is like a monster, specifically the monster's mouth. So, when we talk about cell respiration, there's 3 steps. Now, I do have some specific videos, just like for photosynthesis. I forgot to mention that in that chart for photosynthesis, I do have hyperlinked some videos about the details of the process of photosynthesis, and I have the same thing on the chart for cell respiration. So, if you want to see those details, that's where they are. So this process occurs in 3 steps: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain. Glycolysis, the very first step, it's all about splitting glucose into 2 pieces. If you have oxygen, then you proceed on with the next 2 stages of cell respiration. If you don't have oxygen available, then you proceed on to fermentation. That's the only 2 pathways, either aerobically with oxygen in the mitochondria or anaerobically without oxygen just in the cytoplasm. So this first stage of cell respiration does occur in the cytoplasm. This glycolysis, this breaking down of glycogen, breaking down of glucose into 2 pieces, this is done by everything. This is done in the cytoplasm because everything has cytoplasm. Even prokaryotes have cytoplasm. So once it's chopped up into 2 pieces, those 2 pieces are called pyruvate or pyruvic acid, and 2 little tiny ATP molecules are made at this point. So a net yield of 2 ATP. The pyruvate is then used inside of this mitochondrial matrix. So this innermost inside of this mitochondrion, which is called the matrix. This is called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. So at this point, what we're using is the pyruvic acid, and we're trying to squeeze out a little bit of energy and do a little bit of rearranging. And then the final part of this is called the electron transport chain, and this is kind of like the moneymaker. This is the business part or the business end of the mitochondrion is this gigantic inner membrane called the cristae. It's kind of like saying my first name with attitude. It's ginormous, and something that we'll talk more about next week, surface area and how organisms are sometimes limited by surface area, how they are shaped to maximize surface area. So we could see that this mitochondrion has this gigantic, huge inner membrane. It's bigger than the organelle itself, but it's kind of shoved and folded in there. And this membrane is so big, it's to allow for more of this transfer of electrons to build up a lot of potential energy, which results in a gigantic's the word of the day, so a gigantic yield of ATP. So um, glucose is used out there in the cytoplasm. It's broken into two pieces. Your other reactant for cell respiration isn't used until the end of the electron transport chain. So what happens here is it's almost like a game of hot potato. It's some of these they're called high energy electron carriers, but I'll just call them hot potatoes. They are made in the matrix as this energy is kind of squeezed out of those two little pyruvates that were the result of chopping glucose in half in the cytoplasm. So as you squeeze out these high energy electrons, these hot potatoes, they're passed off to a series of proteins embedded in the membrane, this cristae, or I like to say the chain, the electron transport chain is the membrane. So these proteins pass these hot potatoes along, and as they do, they're losing energy, just the way a hot potato would eventually start losing heat. And then eventually it gets to the end of the line, and the energy's gone. It's done. Sorry. So here's where oxygen comes into play. Oxygen is there to pick up the pieces. And when oxygen is called the final electron acceptor. So it's there at the end of this line, and it prevents all of these electrons that no longer have energy from piling up and causing this whole process to seize. So when oxygen is there, you're going to make in the upwards of 30, 34, 36 ATP. And then the oxygen will join with some hydrogen ions and some electrons and make water. So the water, the byproduct, or one of the byproducts of cell respiration, is made here. So just a real quick recap. The first step is glycolysis. It occurs in the cytoplasm of all organisms. It's split in half and you get 2 ATP from it. If you have oxygen, then you move on to the next two stages of cell respiration, which occur in the mitochondria. If you don't, then you're going to do fermentation, and we do both. So the products of glycolysis, the pyruvic acid, will be used in this cycle called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle in the innermost part of the mitochondrion called the matrix. And from there, energy is kind of squeezed out of it in the form of high energy electron carriers. Those little electron carriers are going to be used at the electron transport chain. And a byproduct of the Krebs cycle is carbon dioxide gas, which is released when we exhale. Then these high energy electron carriers, NADH2, FADH2, are passed along the proteins in the membrane like a hot potato, creating this area of high concentration of hydrogen ions and a lot of potential energy. And when you get to the end of this, oxygen's there to kind of pick up the pieces of everything that has been spent. All the energy's gone, and you end up getting a great amount of ATP here. That's usable energy that we're using right now to do everything that we're doing. And water is made as a byproduct and released. Also, it's released when we exhale with the carbon dioxide.